Welcome to ANCS 375, Ancient Medicine, or in this case, Roman Medicine, because this is a short course. I'm just going to focus on one culture at a time. I'm Dr. Jones Lewis. You can call me Dr. Jones Lewis or Dr. JL, and let's get on with this. Here we go. Oh, also, my kitty is here, so this is Tethys. She's a tabby. Yes. All right, here we are. All right, let's jump right in with the backstory. So this is going to be the really quick historical background that you need to know to understand what's going on in the medical marketplace of ancient Rome. This has to do with a philosophical movement that gets going in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, this isn't by any stretch of the imagination the beginning of medicine, or even the beginning of medicine in the Mediterranean. We have evidence of Neanderthals treating each other for medical conditions, and likely Homo erectus was doing it. As long as human beings have been able to figure out that grog has been hurt and maybe we should try to fix that, there has been medicine. Likewise, the ancient Mediterranean doesn't invent medicine. Medicine is independently developed in many cultures all over the globe. This is just one of many. A very influential one due to historical factors that I'm not going to get into too much here. So suffice to say, if you're looking for a story of medicine that starts with the ancient Greeks invented medicine, this is not that story. Instead, what's going on is that in the Eastern Mediterranean, not even mainland Greece is where this started, but rather along the coast of Ionia. That's the coast of modern-day Turkey facing the Ionian Sea, the Mediterranean. There is an intellectual movement that's born of a high concentration of cultural diversity and trade mobility, because the Ionian Sea is part of a sea route going into the Black Sea, which is itself fed from multiple regions inland in Eurasia. So we have an active trade zone feeding into the Mediterranean, which means that people are coming from long distances bringing information and goods and languages and cultural ideas all together into these trading zones, which themselves form units of ethnic diversity within the coast of Ionia itself. You have Greek-speaking colonists living alongside more indigenous Lydians. At one point, this area was under the control of the Persian Empire as well. And then these are all linked into the greater Mediterranean trade network too. So it's not just about Ionia, but Ionia's trade contact with Egypt, and via Egypt, East Africa, down the Nile, rather up the Nile, because the Nile flows south to north. But then also into the Western Mediterranean, you have contact with the Atlantic seaboard, up into Britain, south along the coast of West Africa. The Mediterranean Sea facilitates this exchange of ideas that leads to the invention of what I'm going to call rationalizing medicine. That is an approach to understanding the human body that attempts to explain what's going on in the body using logical processes that are informed by observations in the natural world beyond the body. The way this manifests in the Greek-speaking tradition brings us to what we call the Hippocratic tradition. Now, the version of this you've probably heard is that a doctor named Hippocrates invented medicine. I'm sorry, that's not true either. There were Greek doctors who predated Hippocrates that everyone in ancient Greece knew about. Like, this isn't a secret or anything, but it's a messier story to tell than Hippocrates fathered medicine. What Hippocrates does seem to have done is founded a working group of doctors that was probably based off of the island of Kos in some way. He does seem to have been a historical person, but the writings that we have listed under the name of the author Hippocrates were not themselves written by Hippocrates, and people in the ancient world knew this. What they used the name Hippocrates for was a convenient way of labeling this collection of written medical sources that came out of the tradition of Hippocrates, his students, his followers, his colleagues, and this wider environment of medical researchers who were trying to use developments in philosophy to figure out a way of approaching the human body that didn't rely so much on tradition and ritual and belief and custom, but instead tried to harness uh, this assumption that the universe works according to rules that are independent of necessarily divine intervention, and that if you understand these rules, you can figure out more effective ways of treating and preventing illness. This is like the first half of the course in the semester, so this is the really short version. Sorry, guys. Okay. The takeaway idea from this, the thing that you need to know that I'll be asking you about, the Hippocratic corpus is the name that we give to writings coming out of 5th and 4th century Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean. You'll hear them described as the writings of Hippocrates. They aren't. They're written by anonymous doctors. They didn't sign their work. These writings were collected into a volume that seems to have been collated at the Library of Alexandria and then spread out to libraries around the Mediterranean as kind of this collected best of the Hippocratics desk set. And it's these writings that heavily inform subsequent developments in Greek and later Roman medicine. But there isn't really a standardized approach to the human body even within these texts. It's part of how we figured out that there are multiple authors, both because ancient people talk about multiple authors, but also if you read a given text in the Hippocratic corpus, it's going to tell you a slightly different version of how the human body works and how to treat it. Even the one thing that you may have heard about Hippocratic medicine, the idea that the body is made up of these 4 humors that come together in mixtures to determine health and illness, that isn't standardized in the Hippocratic corpus. Some authors have 3 humors, some have 6, some of them disagree about what the humors even are, some of them don't talk about humors at all. That's because this is a very early stage in the development of rationalizing medicine, and we're never going to get to a stage that's going to look particularly familiar to modern people. A lot of the stuff we take for granted today, including the scientific method, the way by which we test whether or not a scientific idea is valid or ridiculous, that isn't here yet. They're still kind of working out what the scientific method is, what constitutes proof, what's the relationship between a theory and a fact. All of this is still being worked out, and these authors are tossing around ideas that they're then using and applying in a very experimental way in their own practices. And then they're staying in communication with each other through written communication, but also they're traveling around meeting each other and talking to each other. So these are the collected wisdom of a few generations of Greek-speaking physicians who are laying the groundwork that's going to drive the way certain kinds of medical professionals look at the human body. Now, this is a really influential way of doing it. Although they don't get to the scientific method, this is where the scientific method begins. This is still where we take the basis for a lot of what we consider scientific medicine or mainstream medicine. Sometimes you'll hear it called allopathic medicine. That is the kind of medicine that your insurance company will willingly pay for most of the time if you're lucky and your insurance is responsible. So I'm not gonna be able to describe to you everything about Hippocratic medicine. What I'm gonna do instead in the next couple slides is give you the most influential idea to come out of Hippocratic medicine that you're gonna need to know about to understand what's going on in the Roman period. Ancient science doesn't stay still. There's technological progress year by year by year. 5th century medicine doesn't look like 4th century medicine. And although these Hippocratic writings continue to be used and quoted and referred to, subsequent scientific endeavors supersede the Hippocratics in some cases. Just like today, medicine changes. We know more, we do more, we do what we can with the information we have. Ancient people are no different. Scientific progress isn't a modern thing. Also, while I'm at it, the Middle Ages, things didn't stop. People kept making scientific progress in the Middle Ages, just mostly in Arabic. So there's that. But that's another class. Okay, so here we are. The big idea to come out of Hippocratic medicine as it gets codified and used most commonly in Roman medicine. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, we're going to talk about the Hippocratic Oath. If you've heard of any one Hippocratic writing, it's the Hippocratic Oath, yeah? First thing, I'm going to disabuse you about the Hippocratic Oath. Nowhere in the text of the Hippocratic Oath does it say do no harm, which is the one thing that everybody seems to think is in the Hippocratic Oath. Like, you can do a drinking game to medical shows where they're like, your Hippocratic Oath says do no harm. Actually, it doesn't. It is a Hippocratic saying. It's just in a different piece. It's in Epidemics 3. So you can bring that up in conversation. It'll make you really popular. Trust me. The Hippocratic Oath, then, is a 5th century text. It's very old. However, everything else you know about it is likely wrong. Starting with the do no harm thing, that line isn't in it. As close as it gets is this one clause where it says, I will work for the benefit of my patients and try to protect them against damage. Close, sorta. Now, we have no evidence at any time in the ancient world, that's the world before 200 CE, which is the cutoff for this course, with the death of Galen in maybe 216. Nobody seems to be taking this as a routine part of their medical education. First, medical schools don't exist in the ancient world. In fact, they don't really exist. You kind of get them in the universities of medieval Islam and eventually cathedral schools in the European Middle Ages. But you don't get accredited medical schools that give you an MD degree until the 1900s. It's a lot more recent than you might think, as is medical accreditation. In fact, you can't accredit people with a medical degree in a period before you agree on how the human body works. There's no agreement on this in the ancient world, so certifications aren't really a thing, which doesn't mean there's not quality control. It just doesn't look like it does to us. Okay, so back to the Hippocratic Oath then. This doesn't seem to have been something that people routinely swore to. Maybe there might have been a splinter sect using it at some point in the 5th century, but part of why we say this is that, first, there's no mention of this document outside of this document until we get to the 1st century CE. So that's like 600 years where nobody talks about its existence, which means that probably people aren't swearing it routinely. Because if you're swearing an oath not to kill your patients, you're going to publicize that, yes? So there's no external evidence. Also, the practices that we see ancient doctors endorsing and talking about in their medical writings directly break many of the provisions in the Hippocratic Oath. First and foremost, this idea that you shouldn't give your patients something to end their life, the idea that euthanasia is bad, is something we don't see ancient doctors adhering to. Euthanasia seems to have been a regular part of medical practice in all periods that we're going to be dealing with. Similarly, the Hippocratic Oath's text involves a prohibition against abortifacient pessaries, which is a vaginal suppository to induce an abortion. We know about these because there are hundreds, actually it's more like thousands of recipes for how to make this floating around in medical literature from the 5th century on, as a regularly discussed and frequently used part of women's healthcare. So yeah, that's two big things in the oath that doctors aren't doing. Also, their vow not to talk about what happens at their patient's bedside. Regularly, doctors in ancient texts will tell you about this one time I was treating Bob from Abdera, and so HIPAA has a long way to go before it's enforceable. So what is this text for? You may then ask. If we're not swearing it as an oath, what's going on? Well, this seems to have been a literary genre that comes out of the religious life of the Eastern Mediterranean and the greater Mediterranean area. It's likely a genre that's being used as an early statement of medical ethics in an attempt to tie medical ethics to religious adherence and religious enforcement. At the very beginning of the oath, it calls on Apollo and various healing deities to witness the oath and to come after you if you don't follow the oath. Now, this was likely in an effort to educate hopeful doctors about best practices in an informal way. It might have also been a way of reassuring patients that doctors were held to a higher ethical standard. One of the things in the oath that does seem to have been followed is the doctor swears not to rape their patients or anybody in their patient's house. This tells you a lot about the kind of trust issues that ancient doctors had to deal with because, and this is still a thing in medicine, we trust doctors with the level of access to our bodies that we don't allow other people, even people that we're making children with, our lovers, our immediate family members. Often we don't let them do to our bodies the kinds of things we let doctors do to us. Certainly surgeons, at least I hope not. I don't want to yuck your yum, but be safe. So, what can we say about this text then? I've disabused you of a lot of things. Do no harm is not in it. Nobody seems to have sworn to it. We don't even think that people were following it, so why is it here, and why did it end up in the Hippocratic writings? Our earliest possible mention of the Hippocratic Oath besides the actual oath may be in one of the readings for this week. This is something Cato the Elder said, and we know about it because Pliny the Elder quotes him. I'm going to talk about this textual issue in another slide. You're going to find this in Pliny the Elder, but it's something Cato the Elder said, is that all Greek doctors have gotten together and sworn amongst themselves that they're going to secretly experiment on their Roman patients and just kill them while pretending to be their doctors. Some scholars have pointed to this and said, oh, Cato is badly misinformed about the Hippocratic Oath. Like, he thinks that it's some kind of a sadistic Greek blood oath. That is a theory. I'm not sure I completely buy it. It would be cool if it were, but I feel like I have to throw it out here. So the first actual, legit, provable reference to the Hippocratic Oath outside of the Hippocratic Oath is in the 1st century CE in an author we're going to read towards the end of the course, Cyrannus of Ephesus. He's writing about women's health, and in his discussion of contraception and abortion, he mentions this line in the oath where he says, Hippocrates, the Hippocratic author, said that you shouldn't give an abortifacient pessary. You shouldn't give one of these suppositories to induce an abortion. And then Cyrannus goes on to discuss, well, look, there are a couple of ways of interpreting this. Here's what I think about it. In this soundbite, it's very clear that Cyrannus never swore to uphold this oath. He doesn't consider it binding, but he does consider it important and necessary to discuss. So those of us who are tracking the development of medical ethics in the ancient world think that the 1st century CE is a moment where Greek-speaking physicians begin to reach for this text as a way of building trust between themselves and their patients. And there's a really good reason for that, and it has everything to do with this course, which is why we're talking about this right now. That is, we start to see Greek-speaking physicians becoming the standard of care for upper-class Roman patients. They begin to prefer Greek-educated and Greek-speaking doctors. They begin to see Greek-style medicine as more effective and more legitimate. But at the same time, Romans are in a cultural context with Greek speakers that is actively hostile. Rome conquered first the Greek mainland and then the entire Near East, and with it they enslaved large numbers of Greek-speaking people, including a large number of Greek-speaking physicians. These physicians then, as enslaved people, were forced to practice medicine in Roman contexts. Some of them subsequently gained their freedom. Others were free-born Greek physicians who traveled to Rome because Roman patients had the money and the influence. This was a colonialist world where Greek-speaking physicians were at a disadvantage. However, this didn't mean they had no power, because doctors know things that other people don't know, and this knowledge is directly related to your range of ways in which you can kill someone. Not just that, but your access to the body means that you have the perfect alibi if you want to kill a Roman, at least to a paranoid Roman mind. And this is what Cato the Elder is saying in his letter to his son that then Pliny the Elder quotes and elaborates on. So Romans, when they worried about Greek physicians, they felt that Greek medicine was too valuable to ignore. However, they were really worried that Greek physicians were taking advantage of their power and their knowledge, and that they did not have Romans' best interests at heart. That because this was an inherently colonialist environment wherein slavery and domination was implicit in the social context, doctors couldn't be trusted. What this meant for doctors, we're going to get into next week when we talk about Roman law and risk management. This means that doctors were constantly under suspicion, and they needed to come up with ways to build trust and safe working conditions for themselves when interacting with powerful Roman patients. And here's where the oath comes in. The oath is this document they can point to, and they can say, hey, look, this is in the Hippocratic corpus, and it says I can't kill you right here. Look, I'm not supposed to kill you. This is a good thing. That is where the Hippocratic Oath starts to gain real traction. Now, in late antiquity, as Greek medicine becomes less controversial, as Greekness and Romanness becomes less of a dividing line and more of a combined identity for Mediterranean people, then the Hippocratic Oath becomes more institutionalized, and eventually, when you get into university contexts in Islam and later Christianity, the Hippocratic Oath becomes a useful way of regulating medical ethics in your student body. And at this point, there's a problem, because it's an oath that begins with an invocation of these polytheistic gods: Apollo, Asclepius, Hygeia, Panacea, all of them neither Jesus nor God nor Allah nor Hashem. For monotheism, this is a problem. And that's why I've given you this image here. This is from a late antique manuscript in Greek, where the text of the Hippocratic Oath has been written in the shape of a cross in order to make it look more okay for a Christian going to get medical education. This is the point where the Hippocratic Oath becomes an actual oath that people are taking, long after the period where this course ends. So there you go. If you ever want to be really annoying and pedantic to somebody, bring this up. Or not.